I would just add to that I see this as committing us to a process to discuss a path forward and not committing us necessarily to any exemption whatsoever.
Very well. I believe we're ready for the vote. Mr. Johnston?
For the gray is no, only because I think we should watch the bill.
Fiorini, aye.
Tully, aye.
Motion passes on a vote of 4-1. Thank you. Next item.
I just have one last bill to discuss, and as I mentioned, it's SB 449. Early last Friday, so this is kind of a new arrival, SB 449, which is a bill carried by Senator Galgiani of Stockton, was amended. It was amended significantly, and the newly amended bill and the Senate committee analysis, which came out on Friday, should be in front of you separate from your packet. The amendments to the bill changed it substantially, like I said, and I bring it to your attention now because the bill is about reduced reliance on the Delta, a topic with which we are quite familiar. In fact, the bill in large part reflects the language that we've been discussing for the past 2 years in our proposed regulation, WRP1. It's probably easiest to describe the bill in terms of its similarities and differences with language included in our draft Delta plan, so that's how I'll walk through it. On the topic of similarities, the bill would require urban and agricultural water suppliers to demonstrate in their urban and ag water management plans which they are already required under law to develop, that the supplier has identified, evaluated, and commenced implementation consistent with their own schedule that they develop in their plan, all programs and projects to reduce reliance on the Delta. The bill uses the same bookend language or modifying clause for these programs and projects as we include in our plan. You might remember locally cost-effective and technically feasible. The bill states that beginning in 2015, which would be the next required update for these plans, that the water supplier shall also include in its plan an expected outcome for measurable reduction in Delta reliance and improvement in regional self-reliance. The bill defines reduced reliance the same way that we do in our draft plan, as a reduction or a reduction in percentage of water used from the Delta watershed. As to the differences, the trigger mechanism in the Galgiani bill is a key difference, whereas our regulation would only apply to certain types of covered actions. The reduced reliance requirements of this bill would apply more broadly as a condition of all DWR funding, and the bill states that that includes grants, loans, and direct expenditures. Since our policy only applies to covered actions, it's only a recommendation to those upstream of the Delta or who otherwise would not be undertaking a covered action in the Delta. This bill would appear to have a broader reach. It would not be limited to those who seek to take action in the Delta, but apply to all those who use water in the watershed and seek funding from DWR. This bill would place DWR more I would say strongly in the driver's seat of evaluating these plans and whether they meet the conditions of reduced reliance. Whereas our policy relies on DWR checking for compliance and then on the council's review only upon appeal. So this is a key difference. We've had discussions with the department, you might remember, over the past few years about their level of evaluation of these types of plans, what their resources are for doing so. So that there is a question about whether they have the current resources available to perform an evaluation to this standard. I wanted to bring this bill to your attention because it relates so directly to our Delta plan and because the council did take a position in September of 2011 on a similar bill in the form of a letter to the governor in support of Senator Wolk's 834, which was also a reduced reliance on the Delta bill. That bill was not quite as strong as this bill. It would have required that integrated regional water management plans demonstrate reduced reliance on the Delta in order to be eligible for state funding. That bill was vetoed by the governor ultimately. Any questions?
Mr. Johnson?
This is a bill that the intent is consistent with underlying law and the Delta plan that we're soon to approve. However, it comes to us sprung fully formed at the last minute before the hearing. Sometimes occurs in print April 18th. As such, I'd suggest that we watch it and continue to be available to consult with the author or anybody else on the issues involved, because I think there probably are practical implementation questions, not just the general policy of reduced reliance on the Delta. So my suggestion is that we don't take a position at this time.
Any other comments?
Just questions. I support what Councilman Johnson has said, but I do have a few questions. I believe a while back DWR had come before us, and they had indicated that they have no extra funds to really oversee the program. So how would that apply to DWR at this point?
That's a good question. Like I said, we've been having that discussion with them in terms of what level of evaluation they currently do on the plans. Mm-hmm. I think that the chair has made it clear in the past that he would love them to do a more complete evaluation. They produce, I believe, an annual report, or have at least produced one report that indicates the completeness of the plans, but they loosely define that as submitted and including the major elements required by law. Yeah. So this would be a new program for the department, and I can't really speak to whether they have current funding for that or not.
Yeah, and it's no secret in terms of my position on this particular issue, because I still feel that it will hurt certain communities, because if there's a wholesaler who applies for a grant and there are member agencies who do not meet certain criteria, of course, I think they're being punished because of the language here. The other thing, who is in support of this bill? You may have already said that, but who supports this bill at this point?
The bill was just amended last Friday, and it was scheduled for hearing already in its previous form for Tuesday. So it went forward on Tuesday. The senator presented the bill. It passed out of the committee on a 7-2 vote, and many water agencies and I believe the chamber and a few other business associations spoke in opposition. There was no stated support at that time, but again, it could have been because it was so last minute.
Okay. Thank you, Jessica. Thank you.
Any other comments? I'm gathering the sense of the council is to wait and receive a report next month. And
sure. The next step for this bill is to go to appropriations. So it is early in the process, and we'll have plenty of opportunity to weigh in should we choose to do so.
Great. Anything else?
That's it.
Thank you, Jessica. Good report.